This is the iPhone 14 Pro and the 14 Pro Max, definitely two of the most popular new iPhones available in 2023. And this is interesting because it's been a while since there's been such a wide disparity in demand between the Pro and non-Pro model iPhone. For better context, the iPhone 14 Pros were really difficult to get in time for the holidays due to demand outstripping supply, but sales of the regular iPhone 14 and the 14 Plus have been almost non-existent. Now, I was lucky enough to get both Pro variants the day that they were released, so I've been using them for about 4 months now, so I thought I'd put together a longer-term review on how my experience has been so far, really focusing on the things that I like the most and the things that are kind of disappointing. Now, taking either of these phones out of the box is going to feel quite familiar if you've had any of the Pro iPhones of the past, but particularly similar if you've had the 12 or 13 Pro. The 14 has the same blueprint when it comes to form factor, as it maintains that completely flat front and back and use of a stainless steel frame for an added premium touch. The dimensions are the same as well, with the only minor change being slightly larger camera modules. Now, from a long-term perspective, after using both phones, I do prefer the iPhone 14 Pro over the 14 Pro Max when it comes to form factor. It's noticeably more comfortable, especially if you use your phone often, as it's easier to grip and not as heavy. The Pro Max is fantastic when you first start using it, but because it's so wide and hefty, you do really start getting fatigued when you're using it for extended periods of time. And as far as my opinion on the recycled look, I don't think it should be looked upon as a major flaw because the 14 Pro still looks and feels incredible. Sure, it might be a bit of a dated look at this point, and I am hoping for an overhaul with this year's iPhone 15 lineup, but it's still an incredibly well put together phone that in many ways sets the bar when it comes to design and build quality. Now, yes, the iPhone 14 Pro is a top-end phone made with top-end build materials, but when it comes to drop protection, it's definitely not the best. And considering how expensive this phone is, it's in your interest to keep this in as pristine condition as possible, and there's really no better way to do that than by using a case by Casetify, today's video sponsor. Casetify is the world's most popular tech accessory brand, known for their protective cases, and their newest bounce case is their most protective case ever, giving you protection from even the most extreme drops. It has these expanded corners that allows your phone to bounce upon impact, much like the way modern sneakers work, which is pretty genius. They're also equipped with the new EcoShock impact absorption technology, which makes protecting your phone against everyday drops a walk in the park. So everyday drops, no problem, but what about some of those extreme drops that I had mentioned before? Well, I think the best way to illustrate just how tough this case really is to put it to the test, so I'm going to do that right now by literally throwing it out my second story window.
All right, 3, 2, 1. So you can see that the phone is completely damage free. The case did take a little bit of a beating, but not too bad.
And Casetify offers other really great protection for your iPhone 14 Pro, like this camera housing cover and this tempered glass screen protector. And the cases come in a bevy of unique and fun designs that you can even customize. If you guys are interested in checking out the Bounce case by Casetify or any of their other fantastic cases or accessories, use my special link in the description and you'll get 15% off your order. Get both peace of mind and a stylish look. Check out Casetify today. Now, yes, the look of the iPhone 14 Pros are familiar, no doubt about it, so let's talk about the thing that makes these new iPhones the most unique. I mean, who knew that Dynamic Island would be the feature that turns out to be so polarizing, but regardless of what you think about it, it's definitely the thing that differentiates the 14 Pros the most. And my personal take on Dynamic Island, now that I've been using the 14 Pro for a few months now, is that it's a great feature that's ultimately pretty vanilla. I mean, it's a fantastically integrated part of iOS that works really well, and I do appreciate the time and effort that went into all of the minor details around it. Does it add any groundbreaking value in terms of something new? No, not really. But I don't agree with folks who call Dynamic Island a gimmick, because a gimmick is often associated with the feature that is not used. And you can't not use Dynamic Island. It's an inherent part of the user experience with the iPhone 14 Pro. But I don't want to give off the impression that there's a major difference when using this phone compared to other iPhones that don't have Dynamic Island. We're definitely not there yet. Ultimately, my hot take is this: if you're able to introduce a new feature that's so heavily embedded in the operating system from a user experience standpoint and it doesn't get in the way or stand out too much, that's ultimately a win in my opinion. I mean, think about it. Apple doesn't want Dynamic Island to be loud or over the top because even though that may make some people happy, it'll inevitably make others annoyed. So even though it's nothing revolutionary, I think it's a great addition to iOS and ultimately very smartly executed. But let's talk about one of the disappointing areas of the iPhone 14 Pro now that I've had the phone for a while, and it's gonna be a bit surprising. I'm talking about the battery life. Now I want to throw out a disclaimer, the battery life when looked at independently isn't something I'd consider bad, it's pretty average in that sense. But when you take into consideration the class-leading battery life with the iPhone 13 Pros, I've had some noticeable dips in performance. I know it's a very high bar, but my 14 Pro Max especially just doesn't come close to the battery life I got in my 13 Pro Max. I thought it may have been because of the always-on display, which has since switched to just a black background with the time, but even with this feature completely turned off, it just doesn't perform as well as I want it to. From a long-term perspective, I ultimately think it's a combination of iOS 16 being a bit more power hungry and the additional brightness of the displays the 14 Pros has that's causing this disparity, so I don't think it's anything inherent with the hardware. But I did notice that my battery health is already down to 98%. Dude, with my iPhone 13 Pro Max, I used it as my main phone for over a year and still had 100% battery life before I sold it. Again, I don't want to make it sound like this is a major issue. You can still get a full day of use semi-comfortably, all things considered. It's just disappointing that it's not as good as it was just a year ago. Now, the last component of the iPhone 14 Pro that I want to talk about, it's been kind of weird. It's been both good and disappointing at the same time, and here I'm talking about the camera performance. Now, let's start off with the good. When it comes to the overall still image quality, it's really solid. Images are sharp with really good colors, dynamic range is fantastic, and you get minimal shutter lag, and the camera app in general on the iPhone is by far the most user-friendly. Honestly, from a long-term perspective, my favorite thing about the new sensor has been the ability to have the 2x digital zoom. It's super convenient to have when shooting photos, but I haven't observed any noticeable improvements with the actual image quality with the increase in megapixels. In fact, now that I've been hands-on with the 14 Pro for a good amount of time, I actually prefer the camera system that was on the 13 Pro. It didn't have as many issues that I'm facing with minimal focus distance, and the pictures came out more natural. MKBHD recently did a full video on this, and I totally agree. The image processing that worked really well with the older, lower megapixel sensors kind of overdoes it with this new, larger sensor. And it can unfortunately make the pictures coming out of the 14 Pro look a bit overprocessed. Again, it's not something that I deem as a major problem by any means. The photos by and large still look great, some of the best that you can get out of any phone right now. It just feels like a slight step back rather than one forward. But the camera system overall on the 14 Pro is still class leading, as any limitations the still image quality might have is more than made up for with what this phone could do when it comes to video. Apple continues to crush the competition with its 4K video quality, as the footage is leaps ahead of what other phones are pumping out right now. And I gotta say, a feature that I didn't expect I'd like as much as I do has been the 4K cinematic mode. It's gotten much better, and it's almost my default now when shooting front-facing selfie video. And having access to such robust video shooting capability is more important than it ever was. More and more people share and communicate using this medium now, and the iPhone 14 Pro really delivers here. Now, as far as my overall long-term thoughts on the iPhone 14 Pro and the 14 Pro Max, I can understand why these have been way more popular than the non-Pro 14 models. But to be fair, I think this is mainly because those phones have virtually nothing new to offer, and it could be making the small number of new features on the Pros feel bigger than they actually are. And I gotta be honest, at the end of the day, I'm left a bit underwhelmed with the iPhone 14 Pro. I definitely wouldn't upgrade if you're on something like the 12 or 13 Pro. Those are still great devices that give you 90% of what the 14 Pro has, but I do think it's a worthy upgrade if you're looking to get your hands on your first Pro iPhone, or if you're on something older than an iPhone 11. Speaking of older iPhones, I think going with any of the iPhone 13s in 2023 is a really solid way to go. Check out these reviews to check out why.